Hey photographers, welcome back to the studio. If you accidentally found yourself here hoping to get some traditional tips and tricks for high quality negative scanning, that is not the plan today. We've got iron, a heat gun, a lighter, all to try to see what we can get out of a negative beyond just the traditional images. So let's see what we can do. All right, so here's the plan. I've got this 120 negative that I like the image. I was working with it in a previous video, but I don't really love it. In fact, I did some kind of strange things in the last video, scanning the negative using 60mm lens and just kind of, putting it up against the sky and seeing what's happening. I really like some of the strange sort of photographic artifacts or the marginalia around. So I'm going to push it further today. I've already got some, fairly high resolution scans of this thing. So, I'm going to destroy the original here. If you're going to follow along with this tutorial, make sure that, it's a negative that you maybe don't even really love that much. It's mostly for the sake of experimenting. You're going to need some heat sources, right? Maybe the most obvious one would be something like a BIC. That's a really intense heat source in a small area. If you happen to have something like a heat gun, this is not photo studio, this is like hardware store. Heat gun, this one in particular has two settings, between 500 and 1,000 degrees right at the tip. It's sort of a generalized heat, and it might excite a little bit different changes. I've also got an iron. Just about every one of you guys should be able to find one of these things in your home. You want to protect your iron, especially if this is the thing you iron your church clothes in or something like that. So I'll go through a couple of examples here, a few examples of what we'll call physically editing or modifying the negative. A couple things to point out on the negative so that we're using the same language here. One side of your negative is just plastic. It's the shinier side. If you turn that shiny side over, there's a duller side to the back. The dull side is actually called the emulsion side. The emulsion is where your image is stored. The plastic is frankly just clear plastic. If you damage either side of this negative, it's going to be a permanent change to that negative. But my guess is that the emulsion will scratch easier than the plastic side. The plastic side is the part that's going to melt and distort with heat. So let's just get right into this. This is going to kill me, so I might as well just do it. Chuck this negative on the floor, and oh, so painful. Okay. Now, I can already see that negative has picked up some very serious edits. So let's bring this thing back in. What I'll do repeatedly throughout this whole process is I am going to kind of make some incremental sort of photo edits and scans just along the way. I'll go outside and photograph this thing, come back in, we'll use some heat, photograph it again, come back in and keep changing it. The process I used to digitize this negative is the same one I used in the previous video, a Nikon D600 with a 60mm micro attached, and always I'm shooting in RAW. The results, don't look too bad. I've obviously clipped out some parts of the image. Anywhere that it's scratched all the way through the emulsion is just gone. Okay, the process of photographing this that I'm using this time is pretty crude, right? We're doing this pretty much DIY here to try to be able to replicate it at home. I've got a piece of glass in the back here. It's just got a light coat of sanding on the top, and I've literally just taped the negative to the glass. I'm not interested in perfection here. I'm interested in seeing what we can pull out of this negative beyond the photographic content to really forefront the kind of nature of the film itself. So I got those images scanned. It's time to introduce some heat and see how that goes. The first heat I'm going to add is I'm going to use the heat gun. I'm going to set it on a medium setting, and I'm just going to use it while it's glued right to the glass here. First thing I notice almost immediately is, take a look at that, that plastic is starting to warp. So in terms of like things I might expect to get out of this, as soon as I distort the image plane, I'm going to have all kinds of distortions in the ability of the camera to focus. Let's give this a little bit more heat and jump in with some point heat like the lighter. So in the positive scan of this negative, you can see the tape on the edges and where it was melted by the heat gun. And all of the edits are going to be compounded now. There's scratches in the background, melting in the foreground. In the negative version, the file conversion, I started to see some degradation of the image, but I'm surprised at still how much of the image is still relatively in focus. Okay, It's back for more abuse. Oh no. I think since I've got it here on this negative, I might even try to use a point light source, something that has a very intense amount of heat in one small spot. Be aware of a couple things. You don't want to start your studio on fire. I've got my fire hydrant here, just in case. And you also don't really want to breathe the stuff that's going to come off of this negative when it smokes. So I'm going to do my best not to smoke the negative. But if it does start to smoke, you want to vent that outside. You know what? Even better, take this outside and do it in your garage somewhere that the wind is blowing. Oh no, I'm a terrible example. Let's put this thing back in the scanner. And oh my, look at the carnage. There's shrapnel off to the side. I've totally destroyed some parts of that negative with the flames. In other areas, just melted it and distorted it. But very interesting stuff here, right? Like it's kind of starting to get exciting with all these compounded edits. Oh, this poor, sad little negative. Let's give it some more punishment, shall we? So, if you've got an iron at home, it very likely has some settings on it. I'm going all the way up to the very top settings. One of the things I noticed almost immediately is trying to either photograph this or scan it because of all of that elevation change, right? Like there's almost no image plane to focus on. So if I can flatten this negative out, I may be actually be able to retain both the image content and all these manipulations that I've done to it. So I've got a nice hot iron now. Get a piece of paper or something like a paper bag so that you don't mess up the iron here. And I'm going to iron it right onto a surface that I know I won't damage. I'm just going to leave it right on the glass. So I think I'm going to have to actually give that a little bit more heat, but it's starting to sort of reclaim the flatness of that negative. There we go. Let's see if that thing's back down. Okay, so yeah, I mean, it wants to stay flat, but then it keeps on jumping back up on me. So what I might do is use some of this totally destroyed tape that's still kind of sort of stuck on here and stick that guy back down. As good, as good, as good. Couple of drip drops of water just for good measure, and we're heading back to the scanner. So nothing phenomenal here in the positive, but check out the watermark in this negative. It's this wonderful bright white line that cuts down through the center. So I took it back to the scanner one more time because I accidentally broke one of my press plates, and so I just laid some broken glass in on top and gave it one more final scan. Alright, this poor negative has had enough abuse for one day. I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with the different ways of applying heat and the different ways of digitizing your photographs. So remember, use a negative that you don't really love because you're going to destroy it.